Hello, my name's Suzie Duncan and welcome to the Sewing Street Tutorials YouTube channel. I've been one of the guest presenters at Sewing Street for about 4 years now, presenting different quilt techniques as well as bag making. But what I'm going to show you in these videos is some basic quilting techniques that will get you through your initial stages and then build on to your big projects and more complex patterns. The first one we're going to look at is preparing the fabric for quilting and then cutting it into the shapes and sizes you need. So you're going to need your fabric, obviously, an iron, an ironing table or ironing board, and a fabric stabilizer is always a good investment for quilting because it stabilizes the fabric fibers to give you nice clean cuts, and then you'll get good bias combination of the fabrics when you come on to do things like half square triangles and half rectangle triangles. So there are lots of different fabric stabilizers. I've got one here called Flatter. There's also Best Press and the June Taylor Starch Savvy as well. They all work in the same way and none of them will interfere with your sewing machine needle or your finished project. And they just make your whole task and pressing so much crisper and easier. So when you get your fabric, you're going to lay it out and you're going to hold it so the selvage edges, now selvage, remember, is this bit on the side, the tape bit, just hold it and give it a waft so that it forms in half. So this is 1/2 meter of fabric we've got here. And then with your fabric stabilizer, you're just going to hold it about 10 to 20 centimeters away and give a very light spritz all over the fabric. By the time you've put the lid on, popped your stabilizer somewhere safe, you're ready to iron. It only takes a few seconds to soak in and you don't need to have masses. Iron should be on a cotton setting without any steam, and then you're going to just press your fabric all over. Not only do you get fabulous results, but it's a lovely smell as well if you've chosen a scented variety of stabilizer. So we're going to go to that. Make sure that this fold is a nice crease. I'm just going to turn around so I can do this side. What we're not looking for is exact straight edges anywhere at the moment because we haven't started cutting. We're just pressing any packaging creases out of our fabric. Get into the habit of turning your iron down when you finish with it. So that's pressed and prepared our fabric. Now we're going to come on to cutting. So there are lots of different rulers and tools on the market for cutting your fabric. What you will need definitely is a cutting mat. This one is actually a rotating cutting mat, which is useful when you're coming to do shapes where you've got to cut for all 4 sides, or if you're squaring off blocks. And it works by, if I flip it over, underneath you've got 4 finger holes, and if I take those locks off, turn the board back over, you'll see that it fully rotates 360 degrees. Now that's useful for squaring, etc., but not always useful, and sometimes it can be annoying. So if you don't need the locking mechanism to be open, I suggest you shut the locks down so that the board doesn't float around for you. But they are a good investment. The reason you need a good cutting board is you want your rotary cutter blade to cut through your fabric, but you don't want it to end up cutting through your mat. These are self-seal mats because then you're just going to blunt your blade. And whilst we know we need to change our rotary cutter blade frequently, if you don't have a self-healing mat, then you'll be changing it even more frequently. So we've got a board, we've prepared our fabric. You need some form of ruler. There are different quilting rulers, different sizes on the market. One of my favourites are the Creative Grids, and there's lots of reasons for that. I like the clear markings on these. You want to choose one that you're happy using. It doesn't matter what everybody else wants. It's for your personal preference. They are ambidextrous, so if you're left or right-handed, you can still use these rulers because the numbers will work in either way. White are running one way, black are running from the left-hand side. You've also got your 45 and 60 degree angles marked on here, which are useful when you're squaring off blocks that have got a diagonal centre seam. The Creative Grids rulers also have this non-slip edge to them. On one side it's at 1/2 inch and the other side it's at 1/4 inch. They've also got the non-slip grips periodically across the length of the ruler so that it's not going to slide as you cut. There's lots of tutorials on how to use these on the Creative Grids websites as well, but find one that's useful for you. This is a good size, the 24.5 inch, because it will cut across a fat 1/4 length. So how do we start? We've already pressed our fabric in half. What I'm now going to do is fold that selvage edge up towards that pressed edge that we made. I'm not looking to that as a straight edge. You're going to ignore that one now. And what I'm going to do now is just press the fabric, make sure there's no bumps, and where this crease is in the middle, there's not a big lump. And we're going to cut a clean edge. Now, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to cut on my right side. If you were left-handed, you'd be cutting it on the left side. But when you're cutting a clean edge, what is important is choose one line on the ruler, making sure that the rest of the ruler is covering the whole of the fabric. And you want to look at where all the layers of fabric are falling. So my smallest layer, if you like, finishes about here. So I'm just going to put my finger there. I'm going to make sure that my ruler is beyond that point. And I'm going to line up one of the horizontal lines with that centre fold of my fabric. Hold down my ruler and then I'm going to cut that edge off. Try and do it in one by pressing quite hard, firmly, and then just use your finger to scrape away that excess so you know that it's come away clean. That's now given me a clean edge for cutting. Now, obviously I've taken this off lock, which I shouldn't have done. I should have left it because then I can just rotate and use that side. From now on, we want to cut with our clean edge on the opposite side to the hand you are. So if you're right-handed, I want that clean edge on my left side. If you're left-handed, you want that clean edge on your right side, because all our measurements are going to go from there. So let's start with a 3.5 inch cut. So I'm going to, again, line a horizontal line on this fold that we used before. Remember, I've turned this round, so it's now towards me, not towards the front. And I'm going to look along my ruler to where 3.5 comes. And I'm going to make sure that all that edge of the fabric lines along the 3.5 edge. I'm going to hold down my ruler. If you can't span, for whatever reason, across the whole of your fabric, just do the first bit, stop when you get to the top of your hand, move your hand and track up again. Don't try and do it without holding the ruler down, because you'll find the fabric will shift. But once again, what we're going to do is one cut. Now, if you don't think you've done it in one go, like I haven't, just go over it again. And that's the advantage of holding it down and using your hand to pull away the fabric, making sure you've got a clean sweep. So we've got a nice 3.5 inch strip of the fabric ready for us to subcut down. So that means cut again into 3.5 inch squares. So once you've cut your strip, we now want to subcut this into 3.5 inch squares. So I only want 2, so I'm going to cut through 2 layers of fabric at once. So I'm opening out my fabric. I'm going to get rid of this selvage. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line up one of the horizontal lines with the edge of the cut edge of the fabric that we've just done, making sure that I've avoided the selvage edge. And I'm going to cut that selvage off. And we're going to turn this round so that it's once again on my left side. So I've got a good clean edge this side. And I'm going to bring in my ruler, find the 3.5 inch vertical line and a dark line or white line, whichever you prefer, whichever's easiest against your fabric, to follow on the cut edges. And I'm going to subcut 3.5 inches. So that's 2 squares, and I want 2 more. So I'm going to again reposition at 3.5 inches. Horizontal lines are straight as well. And then I can cut across. So I've got 4 perfect 3.5 inch squares. When you're going to start your patchwork and quilting, so you're piecing your fabrics together, it's very important that you get to grips with a 1/4 inch seam. Most sewing machines come with a straight stitch plate, so it will have a wide sort of frown smile across the middle where the feed dogs come through at these slits here. On some machines you also get a plate that has just a single hole and then 2 wider holes. Now this you can't use for zigzag, but is perfect for piecing because your needle will be going exactly through that centre hole. The advantage of this is when you're piecing on a point, so on the bias cuts on triangles for example, the edge of the fabric, that point, doesn't slip down and get caught in the feed dogs. So depending on which stitch you select on your stitch selector makes a difference to which foot you put onto your sewing machine itself. So in this instance I've got the professional grade plate, the professional grade foot, so when I come to select my stitch I should be using only the quilting stitches for this, which will give me an accurate 1/4 inch pieced stitch. If I had just my straight stitch or my zigzag plate in, so that's either of these two, then I would opt for my zigzag foot, or even better would be your 1/4 inch foot. Now this particular 1/4 inch foot has a guide plate as well, so the idea is that your fabric comes up to but not under the guide, and then my sewing machine needle with the 1/4 inch seam stitch selected would actually create me an accurate 1/4 inch. So we'll look at both of those. So to select your 1/4 inch, if you look along your stitch selector guide, you should find a stitch that says 1/4 inch, and very often it has a P next to it as well. That means it's going to be an accurate 1/4 inch. So this is the stitch that I need to work with. Now on this machine it comes under the quilt section of my stitch selector, and it's stitch number 2. So I need to go to my touch screen and put that in. So I go into Quilt and it automatically sets it at the 1/4 inch stitch, piecing at 1.8 stitch length. So we've got our standard straight stitch plate in position, and I've got my zigzag foot, or the foot that comes on your machine, in place, ready to do my 1/4 inch. So on your stitch selector, you're looking for a straight stitch. Now I could use the utility stitch, which is just the normal straight stitch, but in order to get a more accurate 1/4 inch, if you look on your stitch selector for a 1/4 inch straight stitch and select that one, you know that already you've gone to an accurate 1/4 inch, rather than have to move your needle to gain that 1/4 inch accuracy. So to start with, you're going to align the edges of your fabric that you're going to sew. We want to sew these 2 squares together. So I've aligned this top raw edge here, and then we can start stitching. So at the moment we're just checking our 1/4 inch seam. So I've set my machine to 1/4 inch, and I'm going to use this straight edge of my foot as the guide as to where my fabric edge should be. If you're not sure, you can always put a piece of washi tape. Remember, these machines are yours, so you can put a piece of washi tape or draftsman's tape along your machine, so you've got an accurate 1/4 inch from that point that you can align your fabric along. So I've aligned my fabric with the outside edge of my foot. My machine is set to a 1/4 inch foot, and I'm just going to start stitching. I don't like that noise, but anyway. Cut my thread, and what I want to do now is to check that that is a 1/4 inch. So I bring in my ruler, and I've got a 1/4 inch marking on here, so I'm going to place that on the outside edge of my fabric, and my stitch line is exactly on the 1/4 inch. So I know I've got an accurate 1/4 inch if I leave my fabric running along that outer edge. When you come to laying out your 9 patch, the hardest thing is choosing which bit goes where. So once you've got your layout, lay them in their rows as you want them to end up. And we're going to sew them, all the squares together in one row, and then we're going to press that and then bring those rows together. So we're going to put our fabrics right sides together, and you can either pin or clip. So we're going to clip these ones with the magic clips or wonder clips. I'm going to do the same with the next row, and I find this method of laying everything out and systematically pinning, and I always put my clips on the side that I'm about to sew, so when I bring it over to the machine I don't forget which side I'm sewing. You can also use pins, remember. Now, quick tip, if you put your pin outside the seam allowance, that's away from 1/4 inch, then you don't have to take your pins out as you sew. So we're ready to sew these together. I've got my fabric up against the guide of my 1/4 inch foot, my machine set to 1/4 inch. We've checked the 1/4 inch, but I've also set the machine so that the needle will stay down when I release the power. And we're going to do something called chain piecing. So we're going to stitch the first 2 squares together, removing clips as you go. When we get towards the end, I'm going to stop. Needle's going to stay down in the fabric, and I'm going to bring in the next pair to stitch, and I'm going to allow the beginning of that one to come in about a stitch after the first one finishes, still against my guide, and I'm going to continue that sew. Go all the way down, removing the clips. Again, stop just before the end and bring in the next one, and so on. And you'll continue to do this, chain piecing as you go. And the reason we chain piece isn't because we're trying to be clever. It's actually a time saver, but the biggest bonus is that you save a lot of thread. Because if you imagine every time you cut your thread, you're actually wasting about 20 centimetres of thread. So by chain piecing, you avoid that. We've come to the end of that chain, so I'm going to cut my thread, release all those pieces, and I just need to cut them apart. Now you can use your thread cutter on the side, or you can find a pair of scissors and do that. We need to put our pattern back into place where they should end up. That one's up there, this one goes over here. And then we can attach the third one in each of those rows. So again, I'm going to align those edges, and I'm going to put my clips on the side that I'm stitching. Same for row 2. And we'll use a pin for row 3. Now, if your fabric has a set orientation of the pattern, you must make sure you've got the pattern running in the direction you require at this stage, because once they're sewn, you don't want to have to unpick because they're the wrong way round. So let's take this over to the sewing machine and sew those together. Fabric against the guide, and we're going to take out our clips, stop just short of the fabric, and bring in the next one. Allow a stitch in between the two, and keep going. Stop at the point of that one, bring in the last row and stitch those together. Cut the fabric thread and separate our chained piece, and you can see it runs as almost like bunting in one long chain, but we're going to separate those out. So you'll notice that the thread I've used coordinates perfectly with the fabric colours. I've used a cream thread, so it's blended right in, which is important in piecing because if the seams were to part, you don't want to see thread in between. When you come to pressing, and we're pressing not ironing, you're going to set the seam just by putting the iron over that stitch line, and what that does is makes the stitching absorb into the fibres of the fabrics. We're then going to press these. Now you have choices with quilting and patchwork, and there are no rules. It is personal preference. Now I like to press my seams open because I like the finished project to lie really flat. Some people prefer to press one way or another. I've set the seams, I now want to press open. So I just finger press, that means I use my fingertips to just open that seam, and then I press the iron on the seam and hold it for a few seconds, and that flattens that seam out. And then I'm going to turn it over and just press from the front as well. And that gives us a nice flat seam. So we're going to repeat that for the other 2 rows. So now we have to join our 3 rows together to finish our 9 patch. I'm going to flip row 1 over the top of row 2, and we want to make sure that these seams accurately align. So I'm going to bring those seams together and pop a clip to hold them. I'm going to do the same at the next seam. So you're going to manipulate the fabric so that the seams align and pop a clip in. Sorry, that's it. Then I'm going to come to the ends and make sure that they're aligned as well. So just use your fingers to just move the fabrics so that they all line up. Now that's ready to stitch. So we're now coming back over to the sewing machine. We've got our fabric running along our 1/4 inch, and we're going to sew our 1/4 inch seam. When you get towards a pin, you take the pin out and hold the seam down with your fingertips, or if you've got a stylus, use a stylus, and sew across that seam. Same again when we get to the second pin, but just check that the ends of the fabric, if you haven't pinned them, are still aligned. And we're going to run through. Remember, you can always stop and start at any point to realign your pieces. So we're going to come right to the end there, cut our thread, and we've sewn our 2 pieces together. We're now joining row 2 to row 3. Same method, we've clipped the seams to align, and we're taking the clips out as we go, holding down that seam, making sure the fabric edge is running along the side of our 1/4 inch foot, so we maintain that 1/4 inch seam. Cut the thread, and we've joined our 9 patch. What we need to do now is press those seams. As before, we're going to press our seam first, set the seam so that's as it was stitched. Then we're going to press these seams open. So I go in with my fingertips first, and then use the iron just to press over the top. Do the same at this side. So finger press first. By finger pressing first, it avoids you overheating any part of the fabric by holding the iron in one place while you open the next seam. So because the seam is already partially open, by pressing the iron on it afterwards, it will keep its hold. And then once again, we're going to flip it and press from the top. So we get nice flat block to work with. And that's our finished 9 patch. So what you're looking for is these seams to all line up neatly in one line and perfect points. But don't get too worried if they're slightly out, because by the time this has been quilted, it won't show. Thank you for watching this video on the Sewing Street tutorial video channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get notifications of when the next videos become live. In the next video, which I hope you can join me for, we're going to look at how to finish our project, including piecing the final borders and our wadding and layering, quilting and adding binding.